Hello, Dolly is a musical with lyrics and music by Jerry Herman and a book by Michael Stewart, based on Thornton Wilder's 1938 farce The Merchant of Yonkers, which Wilder revised and retitled The Matchmaker in 1955. Hello, Dolly was first produced on Broadway by David Merrick in 1964, winning a record 10 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, a record held for 35 years. The show album Hello, Dolly, an original cast recording, was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2002. The album reached number 1 on the Billboard album chart on June 6, 1964 and was replaced the next week by Louis Armstrong's album Hello, Dolly. The show has become one of the most enduring musical theater hits, enjoying 3 Broadway revivals and international success. It was also made into a 1969 film that was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, and won 3. History: the plot of Hello, Dolly originated in an 1835 English play, A Day Well Spent by John Oxenford, which Johann Nestroy adapted into the farce Einen Jux wohl Psych machen. Thornton Wilder adapted Nestroy's play into his 1938 farcical play, The Merchant of Yonkers, a flop, which he revised and retitled The Matchmaker in 1955, expanding the role of Dolly, played by Ruth Gordon. The Matchmaker became a hit and was much revived and made into a 1958 film of the same name starring Shirley Booth. The story of a meddlesome widow who strives to bring romance to several couples and herself in a big city restaurant also features prominently in the 1891 hit musical A Trip to Chinatown. The role of Dolly Levi in the musical was originally written for Ethel Merman, but Merman turned it down, as did Mary Martin. Merrick then auditioned Nancy Walker. Eventually, he hired Carol Channing, who then created in Dolly her signature role. Director Gower Champion was not the producer's first choice, as Hal Prince and others all turned down the job of directing the musical. Hello, Dolly had rocky out-of-town tryouts in Detroit and Washington, D.C. After receiving the reviews, the creators made major changes to the script and score, including the addition of the song, Before the Parade Passes By. The show was originally entitled Dolly, A Damned Exasperating Woman and Call on Dolly, but Merrick changed the title immediately upon hearing Louis Armstrong's version of Hello, Dolly. The show became one of the most iconic Broadway shows of its era, the latter half of the 1960s, running for 2,844 performances, and was for a time the longest-running musical in Broadway history. During that decade, 10 blockbuster musicals played over 1,000 performances and 3 played over 2,000, helping to redefine success for the Broadway musical genre. Synopsis: Act I as the 19th becomes the 20th century, all of New York City is excited because widowed but brassy Dolly Gallagher Levi is in town. Dolly makes a living through what she calls meddling Euro matchmaking and numerous sidelines, including dance instruction and mandolin lessons. She is currently seeking a wife for grumpy Horace Van der Gilde, the well-known half-a-millionaire, but it becomes clear that Dolly intends to marry Horace herself. Ambrose Kemper, a young artist, wants to marry Horace's weepy niece Sam Gard, but Horace opposes this because Ambrose's vocation does not guarantee a steady living. Ambrose enlists Dolly's help, and they travel to Yonkers, New York to visit Horace, who is a prominent citizen there and owns Van der Gilde's hay and feed. Horace explains to his 2 clerks, Cornelius Hackle and Barnaby Tucker, that he is going to get married because it takes a woman to cheerfully do all the household chores. He plans to travel with Dolly to New York City to march in the 14th Street Association Parade and propose to the widow Irene Molloy, who owns a hat shop there. Dolly arrives in Yonkers and accidentally mentions that Irene's first husband might not have died of natural causes, and also mentions that she knows an heiress, Ernestina Money, who may be interested in Horace. Horace leaves for New York and leaves Cornelius and Barnaby to run the store. Cornelius decides that he and Barnaby need to get out of Yonkers. They'll go to New York, have a good meal, spend all their money, see the stuffed whale in Barnum's Museum, almost get arrested, and each kiss a girl. They blow up some tomato cans to create a terrible stench and a good alibi to close the store. Dolly mentions that she knows two ladies in New York they should call on, Irene Molloy and her shop assistant, Minnie Fay. She tells Irmgard and Ambrose that she'll enter them in the polka competition at the upscale Harmonia Gardens restaurant in New York City so Ambrose can demonstrate his ability to be a breadwinner to Horace. Cornelius, Barnaby, Ambrose, Irmgard and Dolly take the train to New York. Irene and Minnie open their hat shop for the afternoon. Irene wants a husband, but does not love Horace van der Gilde. She declares that she will wear an elaborate hat to impress a gentleman. Cornelius and Barnaby arrive at the shop and pretend to be rich. Horace and Dolly arrive at the shop, and Cornelius and Barnaby hide from him. Irene inadvertently mentions that she knows Cornelius Hack, and Dolly tells her and Horace that even though Cornelius is Horace's clerk by day, he's a New York playboy by night. He's one of the Hacks. Minnie screams when she finds Cornelius hiding in the armoire. Horace is about to open the armoire himself, but Dolly distracts him with patriotic sentiments. Cornelius sneezes, and Horace storms out, realizing there are men hiding in the shop, but not knowing they are his clerks. Dolly arranges for Cornelius and Barnaby, who are still pretending to be rich, to take the ladies out to dinner to the Harmonia Gardens restaurant to make up for their humiliation. She teaches Cornelius and Barnaby how to dance since they always have dancing at such establishments. Soon, Cornelius, Irene, Barnaby, and Minnie are happily dancing. They go to watch the Great 14th Street Association parade together. Alone, Dolly decides to put her dear departed husband Ephraim behind her and to move on with life before the parade passes by. She asks Ephraim's permission to marry Horace, requesting a sign from him. Dolly catches up with the annoyed van der Gilde, who has missed the whole parade, and she convinces him to give her matchmaking one more chance. She tells him that Ernestina money would be perfect for him and asks him to meet her at the swanky Harmonia Gardens that evening. Act 2 Cornelius is determined to get a kiss before the night is over, but Barnaby isn't so sure. As the Clarks have no money for a carriage, they tell the girls that walking to the restaurant showed that they've got elegance. At the Harmonia Gardens restaurant, Rudolph, the head waiter, prepares his service crew for Dolly Levi's return. Their usual lightning service, he tells them, must be twice as lightning. Horace arrives with his date, but she proves neither as rich nor as elegant as Dolly had implied. Furthermore, she is soon bored by Horace and leaves, as Dolly had planned she would. Cornelius, Barnaby, and their dates arrive, unaware that Horace is also dining at the restaurant. Irene and Minnie, inspired by the restaurant's opulence, order the menu's most expensive items. Cornelius and Barnaby grow increasingly anxious as they discover they have little more than $1 left. Dolly makes her triumphant return to the Harmonia Gardens and is greeted in style by the staff. She sits in the now empty seat at Horace's table and proceeds to eat a large, expensive dinner, telling the exasperated Horace that no matter what he says, she will not marry him. Barnaby and Horace hail waiters at the same time, and in the ensuing confusion each drops his wallet and inadvertently picks up the other's. Barnaby is delighted that he can now pay the restaurant bill, while Horace finds only a little spare change. Barnaby and Cornelius realize that the wallet must belong to Horace. Cornelius, Irene, Barnaby and Minnie try to sneak out during the polka contest, but Horace recognizes them and spots Irmgard and Ambrose as well. The ensuing free-for-all culminates in a trip to night court. Cornelius and Barnaby confess that they have no money and have never been to New York before. Cornelius declares that even if he has to dig ditches the rest of his life, he'll never forget the day because he had met Irene. Cornelius, Barnaby, and Ambrose then each profess their love for their companion. Dolly convinces the judge that their only crime was being in love. The judge finds everyone innocent and cleared of all charges, but Horace is declared guilty and forced to pay damages. Dolly mentions marriage again, and Horace declares that he wouldn't marry her if she were the last woman in the world. Dolly angrily bids him so long, dearie, telling him that while he's bored and lonely, she'll be living the high life. The next morning, back at the hay and feed store, Cornelius and Irene, Barnaby and Minnie, and Ambrose and Irmgard each set out on new life's paths. a chastened Horace van der Gilde finally admits that he needs Dolly in his life, but Dolly is unsure about the marriage until her late husband sends her a sign. Van der Gilde spontaneously repeats a saying of Ephraim's, "Money is like manure. It's not worth a thing unless it's spread about," encouraging young things to grow. Horace tells Dolly life would be dull without her, and she promises in return that she'll never go away again. Characters: Dolly Levi, a widow in her middle years who has decided to begin her life again. She's a matchmaker, meddler, opportunist, life-loving woman. Horace van der Gilde, the proprietor of a hay and feed store and a client of Dolly Levi. A well-known half-a-millionaire, he is a widower, gruff, set in his ways, and authoritative. Cornelius Hack, Van der Gilde era Euro unregistered trademark S chief clerk who yearns for one exciting day in NYC. Energetic, enthusiastic, and adventurous young man who has a sweet innocence about him. Barnaby Tucker, an assistant to Cornelius at Van der Gilde era Euro unregistered trademark S hay and feed store. He is sweet, Norvay, energized, and a follower. Irene Molloy, a widow, beautiful, smart, fun-loving milliner with a hat shop in New York. Dolly has introduced her to Horace van der Gilde but she yearns for romance. Minnie Fay, a young girl who works in Irenia Euro unregistered trademark S hat shop. Irenia Euro unregistered trademark S assistant, she is a Norvay, straight-laced, fresh, follower. Ambrose Kemper, a young and explosive struggling artist seeking to marry Irmgard. Irmgard, the young niece of Horace van der Gilde. She cries often and wants her independence and wants to marry Ambrose. Ernestina Money, an eccentric-looking girl in need of Dolly Euro unregistered trademark S matchmaker services. Rudolf Riesen-Weber, more registered trademark to D of the Harmonia Gardens restaurant. Waiters, a group of waiters at the Harmonia Gardens restaurant. Mrs. Rose, a friend of Dolly Euro unregistered trademark S from years before. A street vendor who sells vegetables. Judge, a white-whiskered night court judge. Easily moved to tears by romance. Musical numbers, song cut before Broadway opening, reinstated when Ethel Merman joined to play Dolly. Song replaced Come and Be My Butterfly during Broadway run. Horace van der Gilde's solo Penny in My Pocket, although it received rave responses out of town, was cut prior to the Broadway opening for matters of time. The song Elegance, though credited to Herman, was written by Bob Merrill for the 1957 show New Girl in Town but deleted from the original production. Productions Original Broadway production The musical, directed and choreographed by Gower Champion and produced by David Merrick, opened on January 16, 1964, at the St. James Theatre and closed on December 27, 1970, after 2,844 performances. Carol Channing starred as Dolly, with a supporting cast that included David Burns as Horace, Charles Nelson Riley as Cornelius, Eileen Brennan as Irene, Jerry Dodge as Barnaby, Sondra Lee as Minnie Fay, Alice Playton as Irmgard, and Igor Zgavin as Ambrose. Although facing competition from Funny Girl with Barbra Streisand, Hello, Dolly swept the Tony Awards that year, winning awards in 10 categories that tied the musical with the previous record keeper South Pacific, a record that remained unbroken for 37 years until the producers won 12 Tonys in 2001. After Channing left the show, Merrick employed a string of prominent actresses to play Dolly, including Ginger Rogers, Martha Raye, Betty Grable, Pearl Bailey, Phyllis Diller, and Ethel Merman after having turned down the lead at the show's inception. Two songs cut prior to the opening are Euro-typical Merman-esque belt-style songs World, Take Me Back, and Love, Look in My Window were restored for her run. Thelma Carpenter played Dolly at all matinees during the Pearl Bailey production and subbed more than 100 times, at one point playing all performances for 7 straight weeks. Bibi Osterwald was the standby for Dolly in the original Broadway production, subbing for all the stars, including Bailey, despite the fact that Osterwald was a blue-eyed blonde. Bailey received a special Tony Award in 1968. The show received rave reviews, with praise for Carol Channing and particularly Gower Champion. The original production became the longest-running musical in Broadway history up to that time, surpassing My Fair Lady and then being surpassed in turn by Fiddler on the Roof. The Broadway production of Hello, Dolly grossed $27 million. Hello, Dolly and Fiddler remained the longest-running Broadway record holders for nearly 10 years until Grease surpassed them. Tour and regional Dollies, Dorothy Lamour, Eve Arden, Ann Sothern, Michelle Lee, Alice Faye, Edie Adams, and Yvonne DiCarlo played the role on tour. Molly Picon appeared as Dolly in a 1971 production by the North Shore Music Theatre of Beverly, Massachusetts. Lainie Kazan starred in a production at the Claridge Atlantic City. Both Tovah Feldshuh and Betsy Palmer played Dolly in productions by the Paper Mill Playhouse. Marilyn May also starred in several regional productions and recorded a full album of the score. Original London production Hello, Dolly premiered in the West End at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane on December 2, 1965 and ran for 794 performances. Champion directed and choreographed, and the cast starred Mary Martin as Dolly, Loring Smith as Horace Van der Gilde, Johnny Beecher as Barnaby, Garrett Lewis as Cornelius, Mark Alden as Ambrose Kemper, and Marilyn Loviel as Irene Molloy. Dora Bryan replaced Martin during the run. Revivals The show has been revived 3 times on Broadway, November 6, 1975, December 28, 1975, Minscott Theatre, starring Pearl Bailey and Billy Daniels in an all-black production, March 5, 1978, July 9, 1978, Lunt Fontanne Theatre, starring Carol Channing and Eddie Bracken, October 19, 1995, January 28, 1996, Lunt Fontanne Theatre, starring Carol Channing and Jay Garner. In the West End the show has also been revived 3 times, 1979, starring Carol Channing at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane and Shaftesbury Theatre, January 3, 1984, April 27, 1984, starring female impersonator Danny LaRue as Dolly at the Prince of Wales Theatre, July 30, 2009, September 12, 2009, starring Samantha Spiro and Alan Corduna at the Open Air Theatre, Regent's Park. Spiro won the Olivier Award for her performance. In 1989 Noni Griffin performed the role of Dolly for a 10-month run of the show at Toronto's Limelight Dinner Theatre. International productions The original German production of Hello, Dolly, with the title character's surname was Ilgia rather than Levi, starred Tatiana Ono. The first production in Spanish was held in 1967 at the Teatro Nacional in Buenos Aires, starring Argentinian actress and tango singer Libertad Lamarque, who also did it in Mexico. In 1996, Mexican diva Sylvia Pinal starred in the Spanish-language version of the musical, Eque copyright Tal Dolly, opposite Ignacio López Tarso in Mexico City. In 1985, Cuban diva Rosita Fornes played Dolly Levi's in a Cuban production of Hello, Dolly by the Teatro Karl Marx in Havana, Cuba. She also played the role in Camagüey City and in a television production under director Manolo Rifat. Tours Mary Martin starred in a U.S. tour, starting in April 1965 and playing in 11 cities. The production also toured in Japan, Korea and Vietnam for a special USO performance for U.S. troops. A second U.S. tour began in September 1965, headed by Channing, and ran for 2 years and 9 months. Eve Arden and Dorothy Lamour were replacements. In 2008, Anita Dobson toured in the UK. Sally Struthers appeared as Dolly in the 50th anniversary tour of the musical, starting in October 2013. Critical reception, opening night reviews of the original production were generally positive, and Carol Channing's performance as Dolly Levi was greatly acclaimed. However, some reviewers criticized the score and the libretto, implying that Channing's performance was responsible for the efficacy of the show. In his review of the opening night performance, the New York Times theater critic Howard Taubman wrote Hello, Dolly has qualities of freshness and imagination that are rare in the run of our machine-made musicals. It transmutes the broadly stylized mood of a mettlesome farce into the gusto and colors of the musical stage. Mr. Herman's songs are brisk and pointed and always tuneful. A shrewdly mischievous performance by Carol Channing. Making the necessary reservations for the unnecessary vulgar and frenzied touches, one is glad to welcome Hello, Dolly. For its warmth, color and high spirits. John Champman of the New York Daily News lauded Carol Channing's performance, declaring her the most outgoing woman in the musical stage today. Big and warm, all eyes and smiles, in love with everybody in the theater and possessing a unique voice ranging somewhat upward from a basso profundo. He also wrote, I wouldn't say that Jerry Herman's score is memorable. New York Post critic Richard Watts, Jr., wrote, the fact that, Hello, Dolly, seems to me short on charm, warmth, and the intangible quality of distinction in no way alters my conviction that it will be an enormous popular success. Herman has composed a score that is always pleasant and agreeably tuneful, although the only number that comes to mind at the moment is the lively title song. His lyrics could be called serviceable. In the New York Herald Tribune, Walter Kerr wrote, Hello, Dolly is a musical comedy dream, with Carol Channing the girl of it. Channing opens wide her big as millstone eyes, spreads her white-gloved arms in ecstatic abandon, trots out on a circular runway that surrounds the orchestra, and proceeds to dance rings around the conductor, with hair like orange sea foam, a contralto like a horse's neighing, and a confidential swagger. She's a musical comedy performer with all the blousy glamour of the girls on the sheet music of 1916. Kerr perceived deficiencies in the libretto, though, stating that the lines are not always as funny as Miss Channing makes them. John McClain of the New York Journal-American particularly praised the staging of the musical, saying that Gower Champion deserves the big gong for performance beyond the call of duty. Seldom has a corps of dancers brought so much style and excitement to a production which could easily have been pedestrian. It is difficult to describe the emotion the song Hello, Dolly produces. Last night the audience nearly tore up the seats as she led the parade of waiters in a series of encores over the semicircular runway that extends around the orchestra pit out into the audience. A tribute to the personal appeal of Miss Channing and the magical inventiveness of Mr. Champion's staging. Awards and nominations. Original Broadway production 1978 Broadway revival 1995 Broadway revival 2009 Open Air Theatre revival Recordings. A cast recording of the original Broadway production was released in 1964. It was the #1 album on the Billboard Pop Albums chart for 7 weeks and the top album of the year on the year-end chart. In 1965, a recording of the original London production was released. In 1967, a recording of the all-black Broadway replacement cast was released, featuring Pearl Bailey, who also starred in the unrecorded 1975 revival. The movie soundtrack was released in 1969. On November 15, 1994, the 1994 revival cast recording was released. Cultural influence. In 1964, Armstrong's recording of the song, Hello, Dolly, rose to #1 on the Billboard Pop chart, making Armstrong, at age 62, the oldest person ever to accomplish that feat. In the process, Armstrong dislodged the Beatles' Can't Buy Me Love from the #1 position they had occupied for 14 consecutive weeks with 3 different songs. The title song was sung in the 1999 film Dick by actor Dan Hedaya, playing President Richard Nixon. The red satin, sequin-bedecked costume, designed by Freddie Whitmore, that Channing wore during Hello, Dolly, was donated to the Smithsonian by Channing and theatrical producer Manny Cloditis, following the 30th anniversary tour of the show. It is currently on display at the National Museum of American History. While Miss Channing's Harmonia Gardens gown is in the Smithsonian, the remainder of the original Freddie Whitmore costumes are now housed in the permanent collection of the Costume World Broadway Collection, a theatrical museum dedicated to Broadway costuming located in Pompano Beach, Florida. Footnotes. References: Bloom, Ken. Frank Vlasnik. Broadway Musicals, The 101 Greatest Shows of All Time. New York, New York. Black Dog and Leventhal publishes pages 152-155. ISBN 1-57912-390-2. Botto, Louis. Robert Villegas, ed. At This Theatre. Applause Books. ISBN 1-55783-566-7. Bofson, Mara. From Hello, Dolly. Dolly Gallagher Levi. Barbara-archives.com. Retrieved on April 8, 2007. Cantor, Michael. Lawrence Maslin. Broadway, The American Musical. New York, New York, Bulfinch Press. ISBN 0-8212-2905-2. Hello, Dolly. Imaji-nation.com. Retrieved on April 8, 2007. Susskind, Stephen. Show Tunes. New York, Oxford University Press US. ISBN 0-19-512599-1. External links, Internet Broadway database listing for all productions, Charles Nelson Reilly's autobiographical film, in which he discusses Hello Dolly, playbill list of longest-running Broadway shows, Tut's study guide, synopsis, casting, choreography, scenes and settings, 1964 New York Times Review of original production.